websites that have personality and are a little bit fun, but are designed to attract your ideal client and make you money. Because at the end of the day, that's why you have a website, to make money or to do what you want it to do for you. Next. So the presentation, why your podcast deserves more than an RSS feed. Let's just make sure everyone knows what we're talking about here. So the RSS feed is a hosting platform for your podcast. And it's where you put your podcast episodes. It's stored there, and it gets distributed to iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're sending it, right? And you also get basic analytics from it, just understanding how your show is doing. But your podcast website, that's really where the magic happens. It's your marketing hub, your community, it's your brand's digital soul. And while that hosting platform distributes, your website really connects and communicates with your audience. And it's where you convert those true fans into your community, like we heard. So let's go to the next slide. Now you might be thinking, do you really need a website? Is my hosting platform enough? Is it working for me? And in my opinion, I think that your website is the most important marketing tool that you might not be using, or you might not be using to its full potential. You spend all this time creating a podcast episode, you put your heart and soul into creating the content, and then you upload it and just hope that someone finds it. But your podcast it deserves more than that. It needs to be on your website, it's your home base, and your users, your listeners can find you there. It's where you can control the narrative, unlike social media, which is the algorithms and things like that. And I'm gonna show you how a simple website will do 3 things for you, for your podcast. Okay, next slide. So when we talk about a business podcast, I always start with a goal. What is the goal of your podcast? What do you want it to do for you, for your website? And the podcast says a similar thing. What do you want your podcast website to do for you? I find there are usually 4 things. The first one is audience growth. You want to increase your listener base. You want to capture new audience segments. You might want to provide multiple entry points. The second is community building, and I think this applies to a lot of us here. We want to grow our community. We want to have a space just beyond the audio where people can make those connections and enable those deep listener interactions. And then you can have monetization goals. So perhaps you have sponsorships, you want to showcase those sponsors on your website, you want to provide sponsorship opportunities. You might want to sell something like a course or a product or merchandise. That would be a way to monetize. And then you have the content expansion and SEO side of things, so discoverability. Sharing more in-depth show notes, publishing transcripts, creating content, blog posts that have to do with your podcast. And how do you determine your podcast goal? It really depends on your podcasting value. You need to understand your unique podcast value, know your target audience, and what your listener wants beyond just the episode, because there's something there. And when you have an idea of what your listeners might want, you want to map out the user journey for your website. And this is something that I'm always happy to brainstorm, but your podcast website needs to have a goal. This is where everything funnels from. Your content, your copy, your imagery, your calls to action, it all stem from that goal. What do you want your podcast website to do for you? Okay, next slide. When I talk about the user journey, and for a business, it's kind of linear. For a business, someone comes, they learn about your service, and then they're just clicking the, book a call or buy. It's very linear. For a podcast, the journey's a little bit different. They're coming to the website, they're listening, they're subscribing, maybe they're engaging, leaving comments, joining your community if you have a group. It's a very different experience, but there is a user journey. And the user journey should support the goals of your podcast. Is it audience building, community building, monetization, content and SEO? What is the goal of your show? And it helps to think of your podcast like a business. My podcast supports my business. A lot of us have podcasts that are something that we created because we just want to share this out in the world. But you need to think of it as a business. What is the goal of this podcast? And how can I translate that onto the screen, onto my website? Okay, let's go to the next slide. I believe that on any website, there are 2 most important pieces of a website. There's the hero section when you first land, and there's the navigation. And that hero section up at the top makes it clear when you land there what is going to be in it for the person who's landing there. And what is the call to action? What do we want them to do? The first goal is the community. If your community is a goal, by having a website, you can create member-only archives, behind-the-scenes content, early access perks, anything that has that community as a goal. Facebook's like Marianne has, Facebook groups, things like that. When you land on this is an example for Crime Junkie podcast. They're really interesting. So when you land there, it says, can't get enough true crime. Congratulations, you found your people. Listen now. When you get there, you know you're part of a community. You found your people. And when you look at the navigation up at the top, what they have is they have merchandise, they have extras, they have fan club. And when you go down there, I was on there, they have like fan evidence submission portals, merchandise that like has like insider gear, everything that is geared towards building your community. When you land there, you know the goal of that website is to get you into the community. Listen to the episodes, but join that community. That is their goal for this website. Let's go to the next one. Monetization, if that is your goal, this is a great example for Pat Flynn. It says, become the entrepreneur you want to be. And it has join now. And when you join now, you are getting access to the community, but you are able to buy online courses, workshops. He has a membership model, so people are kind of paying to play. Everything on this website is geared towards monetization. You could be having workshops, merchandise, anything that you want, like I said, to make money. This is where you would use that example. You can have a buy me a coffee link, if you have a Patreon platform. When you land here, up at the top, it shares all about the courses, the events, the free resources, but they always lead into a course that you can buy. This whole website is geared towards making money. This is the monetization model. Okay, let me go to the next one. Next up is content and SEO. So this is an example from Emily Aborn. She has the Content with Character podcast. It's a really good podcast to give you an idea. She's going to come and speak to us.
April, she's our guest speaker.
And so she shares ways that you can create content. Her website has a focus on content and SEO. So when she publishes her episodes, she's always sending the listener back to her website. In her website, she has detailed show notes, full transcripts. She has links there. She has resources available. And I know, because I know her, she has a focus on keywords, so SEO, being found in search. And she's got links throughout all her blog posts connecting through her website. So her site for her podcast is very highly focused on the content. She's always sending people back to get more content about the show. This would be an example of focusing on the content and SEO. It's all about that overall goal. Now, if you remember back to Pat Flynn, can you go back one for me? Brian, is that okay? Okay, on the right-hand side it says, available now, our free course with the sign up, okay, go forward 2 slides for me, please. Email marketing, and I forget who it was. Oh, Amy said she started her email list just recently. It's amazing. Yeah. I think email marketing is one of the most powerful tools and most overlooked by podcasters. Small businesses alike, but podcasters especially. And it isn't just about sending newsletters, it's getting that direct line to your audience, building that know, like, and trust factor. This is an example. She actually just changed her podcast, I think, last week to the Amy Porterfield podcast. But her whole podcast is about email marketing. You will see when you land on her website for her podcast, it's all geared to getting people onto her email list. Up at the top, free masterclass, you're joining the list. Up at the right, free workshop, you're joining the list. That is the goal of her podcasting website, to get people onto her list. She has so many resources that you sign up for, you give your email, and you get on the list. And email marketing really matters because you're able to control the narrative. I think the stat is about 24% of people aren't ready to buy when they come to a small business website. But what happens is that you don't want them to leave and then forget about you. So I always suggest that you have an email sign up on your business website. Same applies to your podcast website. You want to be able to collect email addresses and continue that conversation so that you can build that community and trust. And I want to share a couple of platforms. I always share with my clients, MailerLite is a great platform to start out with if you don't have one already. It's free, I think up to 500 people for automations. It's
so easy, so wonderful, stupid easy.
Yeah, it's really easy.
Great.
I use ConvertKit. There's Flowdesk, MailChimp if that's something that you want to go to. But just get started. Collect emails. Start building that community and building up that know, like, and trust factor. It's a really important piece of the puzzle. Okay, next slide. I spent all this time talking about the goals of your podcast website because that's the foundation. That's how you build your website. To share a couple of technical platforms, if you don't already have a website, I suggest for those creative podcasts, show it as a really nice platform. And they have a lot of good templates. I like Elizabeth McCravey. She's a very strategic podcast template. It's a plug-and-play platform, and the back end, the tech, they help you set everything up for you. Squarespace is another great DIY example. They have an online e-commerce. It's very easy to use. I think they just started a membership platform. And the same goes for Wix. I actually designed a WordPress, but I find that very elevated and not for the DIY. So that's kind of like the next step up. But these are all great places to start. And then as far as podcast-specific platforms, Podpage. I was looking at Podpage the other day, and I know I think some of us have Podpages. Podpage, they do allow you to do everything that I think you should have on your website. It's just understanding the goal of that website and picking out the features from Podpage and applying it properly. So Podpage, I think, is a really good option if you know what you're doing and you want to set up. You understand that goal of your website. So your podcast website is more than just a website. It's more than just throwing something up. It's your brand builder, your audience connector, your revenue generator. It's like your mission control, and I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle. Next slide. Can you flip forward for me, Ryan, please? Okay. If you have a website, I want you to ask yourself, what is the goal for your podcast website? Do you have a goal? Do you have two goals? Think about that. If you do have a goal in mind, does your website content, the structure, the calls to action, all support that goal on your website? Do you have an email list? And because it's me and I like to design a website that has personality, does your website reflect your podcast personality? Because you want to bring that out. When someone listens to you and then goes to your website, you want them to have the same experience when they land there and say, yes, have that symmetry there. Let's go to the next page. Okay, what I created for you is a website goal setting guide. So I created a workbook. If you want to grab it, there's a QR code. You can just copy it. It's a Google Doc, or you can go to jennybdesigns.com/NEPG. You don't have to sign up for anything. It'll just copy that Google Doc, and it will help you determine the goal of your podcast, your top 2 goals, and what pages might be helpful to put on your podcast website that support the goals of your podcast. And it helps you understand the audience and then create that content strategy around it. And once you have that, I have 4 podcast episodes on the screen that you can listen to. And as you listen to them, I am talking to a small business audience, but the same applies for you. If you know the goal of your website, then you can put these into practice. The first one is understanding high converting website design. How do you get people to take the action that you want them to take? The second is talking about common mistakes. So if you are making those, you can know what to do. The third is you don't have to scrap your website. You can do these 4 things instead. So if you do have a podcast website, you can do these 4 things to make it work a little bit better for you. And then finally, understanding your customer journey. And this is a really important one because you need to have that journey, understanding what do you want someone to do when they get on your podcast website. So hopefully those will help you, and that was
Yay! Who has questions? Oh my gosh.
I have a question. Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. No, you go, because my question's complicated.
Oh, okay. Patreon. Is there a way that you can set, I don't have a Patreon, but if I did, is there a way to set it up on your website so that it's easily usable between the 2 platforms?
Yeah.
Great.
So if you have a Patreon, you would just, however you set it up on their end, all you would need to do is share on your website how someone could get into that Patreon, and there would just be a link. and then it would take me there to sign up and be part of it. Yeah,
So it's a link. It's a link and not an embedded.
I think you might be able to embed it, but whatever the better user experience, like however you wanna show the information and then get them to where they need to click join.
Link
Yeah.
works.
So I'm gonna try to keep it brief, and I know that I can just get with you. So we launched our podcast, and our website is CasaDeConfidencePod.com. And we, very basic, put a very basic, and I've neglected, I'm not gonna say do we anymore, but, I've neglected the site. And at one point, when we launched the production side, Casa de Confidence Productions, I went ahead and I got the domain, but it was too long, and then decided to just combine it. Is that a mistake? Because, I mean, I basically have two businesses on the one website.
Thank you. Is it the coaching and the podcast business?
Yeah,
on
so
the-
the coaching, I have Go Confidently Services
Yeah.
has its own.
Right,
In the podcast, there is a tab there for the podcast, and it takes you to the podcast player
right.
website within the Casa de Confidence pod. So,
The Casa de Confidence podcast supports the podcasting agency, correct?
and the podcast, so it's like interchangeable.
So you're like me, right? So my podcast supports my business. My business is the URL. And it sounds like you did it the other way around. I don't think there's a right or wrong, and I think you've already created so much domain authority with that. But I do think that when you get to that podcast website, it should be more about the business, and the podcast is a piece of that business. Because you're monetizing your podcast, you're trying to get people to sign up to work with you, so the goal of that website is to get people to sign up to work with you. So that should be the primary focus, and the podcast supports that.
That makes sense.
How did you do it? I think it may have been answered already. It had to do with so I put Buzzsprout, and that is the podcast landing spot. I also have the business page, which most of my focus has been there. Just go to lastingconversations.com. Where does the one coexist with the other?
You're just like me, so the podcast supports your business.
Yeah.
And you do coaching or,
Not yet.
okay. So I would say the same thing like Julie, you would have the website for your business
Right.
and the podcast. Do you repurpose your episodes into blog posts or anything like that?
No, right now it's just the show, and but these are the things that are gonna get reimagined into what the whole entity is, so I appreciate the goal. What is the next level of the goal going to be?
So you have the RSS feed right now
Yeah.
with that podcast.
Yeah.
So you wanna have the website that is about your coaching, your business, and perhaps you have a blog page that has the transcripts from the podcast. You have a podcast page that has your episodes, and then you can link or you can embed those from Buzzsprout into that page. But I think the website needs to be about the business, and the podcast is supporting that business.
Okay.
Because hopefully in your podcast, you're sharing how people can work with you, that call to action to visit the website. They get there, and then they see the business. That's how we make money with the website.
Okay.
If I understand, you're using the Buzzsprout's provided website for the podcast,
I think
which is
as
restrictive.
Jenny was talking, I think there's probably two things. There might be two things happening. One is if somebody's organically listening or watching on YouTube or something, and they go to show notes, and somehow that's gonna be where Buzzsprout or these other podcast websites are, which is different than within my general promotion, or maybe all of us, we promote our websites, our business sites, our .coms. It seems like there's two different things. The people who are organically finding and going to show notes, they're gonna go where I tell them, go to .com, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you? One goes into the next, and I hear everything else that you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would just send them to one place, right?
Right.
To have it all there,
Right.
so that they could take the next
Go to
step with
one
you.
place.
One place, yeah.
Okay, LA, you had a question?
Yeah. All right, you've mentioned transcripts a couple of times.
Yes.
Should the transcripts be at the bottom of your webpage for each episode that has the show notes, or should it be, take them to another, just a transcript page? And I'm
Okay,
thinking SEO wise,
okay.
1 or 2 pages.
Do you have blog posts for your episodes?
Mhm.
Okay, then I would say if they want the full transcript, you can leave that on the podcast platform.
Just on the bottom.
That's how the search engines for the podcast search engines find them. But if you have, and I maybe interchangeably used blog post versus transcript, I believe that you should have a blog post for each episode. So it would be similar to a transcript, but more like a blog post, so it's more readable. That should be on your website, because that's how you're being found by the search engine.
So should it be on the blog post or a completely other page that's like, this is just the transcript page?
No, I would leave the full transcript just on the podcast player.
You can still link it though, so, because this is what we're doing for a couple clients, right? So we do the blog post and then we link the transcript at the bottom as well.
On the player,
To-
right?
On the player,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, like, say Buzzsprout transcript, you can upload it, transcript into Buzzsprout, you don't necessarily see it, right?
Well, you can, in the show notes, it will show you, if you're uploading the transcript into Buzzsprout,
Okay.
or whatever your platform is, you can upload it and it shows you. Now, it gets complicated, obviously, when you have a YouTube, because then you have different transcripts as well.
And I'd like just to know, how important is that transcript?
Good question.
And should that be an
For-
extra for someone to?
For SEO,
be paid
for website SEO, it's not about the podcast, the transcript, it's about the blog post, which could be a repurposing of your transcript, but ensuring that you're using headlines and then keywords in the material. If you just post the full transcript, it's not gonna work as well for you. You wanna make sure you at least have a blog post that's using specific keywords in your headlines and in the body. And then you can link to the full transcript, but I would keep that on your player. I wouldn't go through the effort of putting it onto your actual website. I would just leave that where it is, because that's more for the podcast player SEO versus just the general Google SEO.
Okay, so what, all right. Oh my gosh, we're taking in so much information. Zoom, do you have any questions, Zoomers? Oh, Jen has another question, yay!
So a lot of people here have service-based businesses, and I actually have a product-based business that I ended up creating my podcast as a kind of extension. So 2 totally separate websites, 2 totally separate looks. I sponsor the podcast with Moody and do all of that, like the commercial that I put into the podcast, that kind of thing. Is that, because I'm hearing there's so many, this is based on service-based, but is that something that is appropriate, or should I be doing something different?
And your product is the Moody Monster,
Yes.
correct? And it does relate to your podcast.
It does, in the sense that the podcast came from Moody, basically, from me going on other people's podcasts, talking about my whole journey,
Yeah.
basically, and Moody is my journey.
Yeah.
So, and there's 2 totally different looks. They fall under the same LLC, that kind of thing, but is there something more that I can do to promote Moody, as, that it's an extension of Moody?
I would say, you mentioned it in your podcast episodes.
Yeah.
And I hope maybe you have a podcast show notes where you're writing a blog post about
Yes.
the episode.
Oh, I'm not doing blog posts, but I will.
Do you put the show notes anywhere?
Yes, I put them in I put them in Buzzsprout and Podpage, make sure it's all getting sent to like Spotify, that kind of thing.
Okay, and that just appears below the episode, correct?
Correct.
And then what I would suggest is you create some content, like a blog post that is a little bit more extended than just the show notes, like a blog post, talking about the Moody Monster and linking over for people to find out more. And then if Moody Monster is a separate site, I would have on your about page, on that site, your story, and making sure you're talking about the podcast, and then sending people from there back over to the podcast page. right? Like have that connection there because they are interwoven together.
Yeah, it sounds like blog posts are more important than anything else in this.
That's the
For
only, and
For
it's
websites.
confused, I don't know, like, if I can be clear, but the show notes that you put in your podcast player,
Yeah.
that's not gonna be searched through Google. That's just searched through the podcast player. You wanna be creating a blog post on your website, that's what Google is searching.
Okay,
That's how you can be found through discoverability.
oh, that's
So
great.
it's two different things, probably a longer form of those show notes.
So when you're talking about a blog post, are you talking about like the episode page on my website where I describe the episode? Or is it an actual separate blog post and then I say, if you wanna learn more about this, listen to this episode?
How do you?
Because I have all of my podcasts on my website and they each have their own episode page, which is like a podcast page, I mean a blog page. But it's not a quote unquote, like a written article, as I also have a blog that have different articles. Are you talking about an article, or are you talking about a write-up about that particular episode?
So I think you're almost there. I'm talking about what you already do, but making it a little bit more substantial. Because you have that episode right up on your website. I'm calling it a blog post because when you create it in a specific format, making sure that you have the headlines and the body and the keywords, you make it a little bit more substantial, it will be found on Google. So probably what you're doing right now, but expand upon that so that it can be discoverable. Does that make sense? And when I build a website, I create, blog posts, but I also make episodes. They're also blog posts, I just tag them differently. So they're the same exact thing, they just display in different places.
So what I have right now is I have a description, just like I would when I'm promoting it, and takeaway points, and maybe a few other, paragraphs. Is that enough? Or should it be like a whole article of what we talked about?
Like, should there be a word total? Like,
I was gonna say, there is no specific total. I think that around 1,000 words would be a good place to
helps
start.
Google find you.
You want it a little bit longer, you wanna break it up and make sure that there are headlines. I actually, truth be told, I do my transcript, I put it into Claude, and I ask Claude to write me a blog post based on this episode. And then I include the keywords, and then I just edit it. But what they give me is a blog post, it's got the headlines, the
Yeah,
sub-headlines,
it's
a
proper
little bit
format,
longer.
yeah.
You can add the resources.
But you're saying like episode with guest or whatever
You use the title if my episode title has a good keyword in it, which I try to make sure that my podcast does, then I use that title. And if my keyword isn't in the title, I make sure that it's in all the other headlines and in the body.
But it's clear that this blog post is about that episode.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a blog post.
It's
about that episode.
repurposing. But the thing is that what we don't often do as podcasters is we need to always be thinking about inbound marketing, right? How do we get people? And therefore, it's one thing to make Apple happy, Spotify happy, all these other platforms, Buzzsprout happy, but we gotta make ourselves happy. And the way you do that is to play the game of the Google search. And it's a long tail game, right? And so that's what's great, Jenny B, helping us start thinking more about, again, that ownership of our creativity. Because we are creators, we're building something and we're using them as tools for whatever reason, but we have to play a few marketing games with that. And that's the beauty of having the website, is that you can take what you have for your episode, but now you might want to use a different title because you're going to make it happier for Google and keywords. Oftentimes, you might want to make your podcast episode fun and clever, or whatever title, but the blog post does have to be more concrete. And leveraging AI, let's face it, this has just been a gift to us as creators, especially if you know how to use the prompts. I highly recommend everybody get on TikTok and follow everybody who knows how to do the AI prompts because they're so good in helping you teach AI to represent you and get your product and services out there. Jenny B.
Amanda
thank
had
you.
her hand up.
Oh, Amanda, you got a question, guys?
I put it down, thank
Yeah,
you.
but you had her hand, she had her hand up for a while.
I gave up. So you mentioned
a lot about email list. Now, is there a way to like have like where people can sign up if you don't have the official website yet?
Sure, our platforms, MailerLite, ConvertKit,
Flowdesk will have it.
Flowdesk. All you do is
Because
sign
I've
up.
used Flowdesk and I haven't been able to figure out like how to get a page.
Amanda,
And
if you want, I can show you.
Yeah.
I'm a partner with Flowdesk.
Yeah, just set up a landing page.
I can show you how to use it.
Set up a
Okay.
landing page, I'll have a website.
Yeah, we've
Put
been
in
using
show
this since
notes,
the
send
start.
people to the landing page.
okay.
Awesome.
Just a quick thing too, I'm sorry, because you mentioned
keep going.
Claude.
Yeah.
We use Pod Squeeze, and we're checking other platforms, but Pod Squeeze will give you a newsletter, a blog, the keywords. It will also give you social media posts, the show notes,